first report was not yet out, but all the elements were already there. In fact, they had been there for about a century, since 1896. Svante Arrhenius made the first prediction that if we continue burning coal, we will increase the atmosphere in CO2, and this will lead to warming. Since then, we have exploited 650 million tons, and now we have reserves nearing 1 billion tons. Copper, contrary, and metals in general, contrary to coal, oil, and gas, once extracted, it can be used once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, sometimes many times, because it's recyclable.
Please welcome a man who has spent the last 35 years looking at the Earth's thermostat and politely screaming that the house is on fire, long before it was cool, or rather while it was getting uncomfortably warm. Cédric Philibert is a former lead analyst at the International Energy Agency and the author of more books on energy than there are actual wind turbines in some French provinces. While most of us are doom-scrolling through climate catastrophes, Cédric is the rare guy who looked at the solar panel and decided to write a book called Energies of Hope. He's here today to tell us why everything you thought you knew about running out of metals is probably wrong, why your electric car isn't a criminal lie, and why he's still optimistic even though he knows the truth. Cédric, welcome.
Hello, Ernest. Pleased to be with you.
So, for the start, Cédric, you wrote a book in 1990 called Is the Earth Burning? And your latest is called The Energies of Hope. Is the 35 years between those two titles, have the fire grown, or have we just finally found the extinguisher?
Both of them. Indeed, what is amazing, if I look at this book now, it's how precise the predictions were. They were not mine. I was not a scientist. I had been a science journalist, and I had been advisor to the French Minister of the Environment. At the time, the greenhouse effect came to light between government circles. And indeed, the predictions were incredibly precise already, even before the IPCC was decided. That was exactly at this time, a decision of the General Assembly of the United Nations in 90, I think, created the IPCC. The first report was not yet out, but all the elements were already there. In fact, they had been there for about a century, since 1896. Svante Arrhenius made the first prediction that if we continue burning coal, we will increase the atmosphere in CO2, and this will lead to warming. And at the time, it was seen as a good thing, because he was a Swede guy, and he thought this could help cultivate more things in Sweden. And indeed, the slow and limited global warming has good sides as well as bad sides. And sometimes people say to me, oh, you're dismissing it. No, I'm not. It's the opposite. I'm saying that there may be a bigger gap between small limited warming and rapid and unlimited warming, which could be a disaster. The difference is even bigger than with current situation today. So recognizing that some warning has some good effects, like less people dying from cold, is a good thing. But we're going in a situation where many more people will die from heat and heat waves, that, as we've seen in Pakistan and in India in the last few years. So indeed, it's we need to We don't need to reverse it. We don't need to, but we need to stop it as much as we can, and make it. It will be very difficult to completely stop it. But if we just slow it extremely, make it an extremely slow change, it will be much easier for human societies and human beings to adapt. And that's the point.
Now, talking about slowing it, you spent nearly 20 years at
Yeah, yeah.
IEA. And when you're sitting in those rooms with world leaders and the data is screaming at you, but action is moving at the snail pace, how do you keep that from turning into cynicism?
Huh. These questions will join the first question, which I have not completely responded. Uh, uh, we've also seen the solutions emerge. And in a word, the solutions are mostly based on solar energies. And I'm saying energies in plural because solar energy is not only solar rays, it's also wind and hydropower. They're all different forms of solar energies. And in another book I wrote in 90 on renewables, I wrote this that the greenhouse effect is that by burning fossil fuels, we slightly increase the capacity of the Earth's atmosphere system to capture the solar energy. And this enough should prove us that the solar energy can fulfill our energy needs by itself. So the solution is in the problem, if I may say. And indeed, we have seen this emerging. In my first year at the IEA, I was in charge of the evolution of mitigation commitments. My task was to think of ways to bring in the developing countries because they were not ready in the Kyoto Protocol. They had no targets in the Kyoto Protocol. And I had just invented, working at the UNEP, the idea that we could give developing countries non-binding targets. The idea was that if they reach their target, they could be rewarded for that. They could sell
Yeah.
permits on the market, but they would not be obliged to buy anything
So it's
because
a
they could.
carrot without a stick.
Exactly right. That's the same as a clean development mechanism, except that it's not project by project with huge transaction costs and very difficult and big difficulties in defining the baseline and what would have happened otherwise, etc. It's for the
Mhm.
country as a whole. And so that was in a way that is what is in the Paris Accord.
Yeah.
That is non-binding, except that we have non-binding targets for everyone now. But that's another thing. Working in this evolution of mitigation commitments, I also came to the view that my fellow Europeans were wrong in asking for ambitious and binding targets. Climate change is not a small thing. Greenhouse gas emissions are embedded in every activity from agriculture to use of energy to transport to heating to everything. So you cannot expect governments to commit themselves to both ambitious and binding targets. It's a fear, especially for developing countries, of course, but also for the other countries. And you see that obviously with the US, but also with many others. They will, if the targets have to be binding, they would be lean. If they are to be ambitious, they would be non-binding.
Mm.
So what is the use of ambitious but non-binding targets? Is to focus expectations of everyone, governments, companies, individuals, and to make everyone think, okay, I should do that because the other will do it, and I will be late in the industrial competitions if I don't do it, etc., etc. And it's worth doing it because everyone is doing the same. So,
So
but
in practice,
yeah.
what had better results in practice, non-binding or binding targets?
Well, the binding targets of the Kyoto Protocol did almost nothing in the evolution of mitigation of greenhouse gases. Almost nothing. So it
Mm.
started the process. It has some learning virtues, but that's all. And the Paris Accord is much stronger, much more ambitious, and delivers more results. But, and this comes to your first questions, indeed, in the last 35 years, we have seen emerging the technologies we need to mitigate climate change. First of all, um, the solar and wind energy technologies have seen their cost plummet to
Mm.
divided by 10 for solar, by 3 for wind, at least, depending when you start. But and we have seen a massive development, and massive development is linked to the reduction in cost in both ways, because we know the cost reduction also happens as learning and deploying things on the with rapid return and lessons learned, and progress incorporated in the new wave of technologies, etc. So we now have the technologies. It's very uh, thought. It's very speaking to look at the third volumes of the IPCC reports from 1992 to the last one in 2023. Uh, the first, they said there are plenty of solutions: biomass, CCS, nuclear, renewables, energy efficiency, self-sufficiency, whatever, with no hierarchy, with no indication of what matters and what is secondary. Now we have a very precise thing. Look at the just the synthesis of the last report. We have the potentials for big reduction by 2030. Solar is first, wind is second, then comes a reduction of methane emissions in exploration of fossil fuels, exploitation of fossil fuels, and etc. And at the end, you have nuclear and CCS.
So
So
you
that's
mentioned
yeah.
you mentioned energy efficiency. I read on IEA that they are considering this to be one of the hot topics for upcoming 10 years. So can you give me an introduction into how they are looking at it?
Energy efficiency.
Yeah.
Well, I think of course energy efficiency is very useful, and lots of it will happen through electrification, because when
Mhm.
you turn from a thermal car to an electric car, or when you go from a heater to a boiler to heat pumps, you consume a third of or a fourth of the final energy
Mhm.
demand that you consumed before. And so we have lots of other examples in the industry, in the heavy industry. Uh, but energy efficiency is plagued with rebound effects in many places and circumstances. You look at insulations, building insulation. Um, you very often have a rebound effect. People were uncomfortable in their flats or houses. Now they're much more comfortable. They tend to raise the temperature, of course, not too extreme. It is limited, but it exists. And at the end of the day, when you look at the money invested, you find, of course, some actions that are very positive, that have a short return on investment, and you find others that have a very long return on investment, if any. And in terms of CO2, again, some actions are very profitable and some are very expensive in terms of per CO2. While shifting a gas boiler to heat pumps in a country that already has or will soon have a very low carbon electricity system, reduce massively the emissions in a very short time, and at a better cost. Um, at the end of the day, insulation is often, not always, but often a social policy,
Mhm.
because it's important for the people to be comfortable at home, and
Yeah.
we have millions that are not, not to mention our Ukrainian colleagues nowadays. Uh,
Okay.
but yeah, uh, difficult not to
So
have a fun. But yeah, it's more a social policy than an environmental policy.
help me understand the transition rebellion. Why are we seeing people who claim to love the planet actually fighting the very things like wind turbines that could save it?
You have a mix of different things. You have the, the not in my backyard syndrome, which is something I consider normal, understandable. It always
Mm.
happened. You see your closed environment modified, and you're not happy in the first place. Okay, fine. Um, when people come to me and say we don't like the view of your wind turbines, I say okay, it's difficult. I see something different in the wind turbine. I see the fact that we're going to gain on sovereignty on our energy procurement. I see that it's a signal addressed to the young generation that we're taking care of climate and of their well-being in a century from now. But I understand you don't like it. What can I say? If you don't like it, you don't like it.
Yeah.
Then I see those people very often manipulated by professional of fake news. And
Mhm.
a big source of fake news comes from the US, sometimes
Mm.
Australia or others. The the many think tanks financed by big oil, previously big coal, now it's more big oil, financing institutes that deliver constant false news, but very often framed in green terms.
Yeah.
Um, um, they
Very
say,
well
well,
prepared.
yeah, here Trump, oh, the
Yeah.
offshore windmills, they destroy the whales. Nobody has ever seen something like that. You can understand that if it's bottom fixed windmills during the work phase, yeah, the big animals tend to stay away because of the noise. This lasts few months, and then after that, an offshore wind farm improves the marine biology. First, you have the risk. The I don't know the English name. You have a number of animals that comes to colonize the
Yeah.
masts, and then more importantly, you have a protection against overfishing, because
Mhm.
only selective fishing is possible during within most of these wind farms. So you cannot have the fishing devices that damage
Yeah.
the floor of the oceans. So you have only selective fishing. So it's a zone where the fish reproduce more,
Yeah.
and it's a protection. It's a protection. It's protection for marine life. And instead of that, you read everywhere, ah, yeah, this project will, industrial project in the sea will damage marine life. It's exactly the opposite.
So you
Example
called
of
the
fake news.
idea
Yeah,
that will run out of metals a myth.
yeah.
If the Earth has enough copper for centuries, why is the scarcity narrative so sticky?
Um, I think people have not looked at it closely, and I understand that it takes time. I myself was uh, impressed by the idea that the ore grade was diminishing. I was I was at a meeting with miners years ago when I was at the IEA, and I learned that yeah, the ore grade of copper was going down from 1.7% copper in the ore to less than 1%, and now it's
Mhm.
0.6%. It went from 1.7 to zero point 0.6. So I thought, yeah, that's worrying. Maybe we're close to the end. But in fact, it's the opposite. That is, um, as we exhaust the very rich deposits, and we improve our technologies, uh, making things bigger and with new technologies, we have now access to deposits with much lower grades, and there are many more deposits, and they are bigger than the very rich ones. So, in fact, the reduction in all grades is a lever of the increase in the reserves we can use. And if you look at the story of copper, that's quite interesting. 35 years ago, when I wrote this book, um, the U.S. Geological Survey said we have 360 million tons reserves. Reserves are what can be exploited with current technologies and current costs. Okay. Since then, we have exploited 650 million tons, and now we have reserves nearing 1 billion tons. And this is not the whole resources. The resource is bigger. There are known and suspected resources. They are not accessible at current prices and current technologies, but they will most likely be accessible if the price increases or if the technology improves, and both will happen. And the resources are over 5 billion tons. And that's only the resource we have at shallow depths.
Yeah.
If we improve, if we were, we have some gold mines that go to 4,000, or diamond mines that goes to 4,000 meters. We have copper mines, few hundred meters. If we go deeper, we'll end up with dozens of billion tons of copper. So I'm not. I feel we can certainly do the transition. And one thing you should not forget is that um, copper, contrary, and metals in general, contrary to coal, oil, and gas, once extracted, it can be used once, twice, three times, four times, sometimes many times, because it's recyclable. Which while gas, oil, coal, once burned, is CO2 in the air, and
Yeah.
to extract it from the air and reuse it, you don't recover the
Yeah.
energy. It's of very, very little use and
It's a
feasibility.
fairy tale.
Well,
It's a fairy tale at the end. Uh, the carbon capture.
yeah. We can capture carbon that are very concentrated in some industrial processes. That
Yeah.
we can do. If you have carbon from fossil fuel consumption, it's already much more difficult. And going to direct air capture, I'm very
Yeah.
suspicious, because despite all our
So,
best efforts, the percentage of carbon in the air is way too low to make this profitable.
but talking about the mines and the minerals, then there are some other questions like how many mines do we need? How much time do we need to develop these mines? And then again, how much money we need to invest and how much time will we need overall to get, to get there on time?
Right. Um, yeah, I've seen many times uh, demonstrations that we need to open many more mines, and this takes 15 years, etc. I think this is not the way things go on. Um, Mines are very often extended and expanded in depth and in surface.
Mm.
And this is how the exploitation increases. Of course, sometimes you create new mines, but the kind of calculation that you need, if we are to double the use of copper by the end of by 2050, which is kind of a reasonable assumption, we would need to open X hundreds of new mines is just false. We need to expand and extend the number of mines that already exist. Maybe we create a few new ones, but that's not a simple calculation like you multiply the number of mines by X. It's not the way it works.
So, forgive me if this sounds really basic, but if solar is so abundant, why aren't we 100% powered by it yet? Is it the storage or is it something more human, the reason?
Well, it's only recently that solar technologies have become affordable.
Mhm.
Uh, when we started to think of it, well, some started long ago, but even in 2000, when the first policies were deployed in Germany, in Denmark, in California, in Japan, uh, the cost was high. Um, and the cost was still high at the end of the 90s. The cost of PV. At the time, by the way, that was one of my big mistakes. Uh, I was, I'm still is a big fan of concentrated solar thermal
Mhm.
because it's more dispatchable. This remains an advantage, but at the time it costed twice. It costed half the price of PV electricity. But now PV electricity costs a third or a fourth of the cost of concentrating solar thermal.
Yeah.
So a big change that I did not foresee foresaw with precision. I must confess. I was not the only one making that mistake. Most most people did the same. And I at the IEA, I was still one of the more optimistic about PV and solar in general. But I was not enough. I was not enough.
Yeah.
What I wrote there in when I moved to from the environment division to the renewable energy division in 2010, I was still a big fan of CSP and not so much a believer of PV, and I was wrong.
Mm.
But solar was still here, and I wrote a book on solar then in 2011, where I had a chapter that is kind of um, precursor of what the IEA did in 2021, the net zero emissions
Mhm.
scenario, with lots of solar, wind, and hydro.
You talk about electrifying almost everything.
Yeah,
What is the one thing we can't electrify, and does that one thing sink the whole ship?
I would like to give an answer with two things.
Hmm.
Uh, One thing that is very difficult to electrify is air traffic, air transport,
Yeah, true.
uh, because uh, batteries are heavy and the energy density can improve. It can be multiplied by two, by five. It's still too heavy for flying under reasonable distances with reasonable load. I'm saying this in a world where drones, uh, which are not all electric, by the way, but electric drones are making incredible improvements and they're being used for many purposes, good and bad purposes. So this suggests that, well, battery powered engines can do a number of things,
Mhm.
but basically they would not replace the medium distance and long distance airplanes by no means. Maybe on the very short thing, people think of making flights from the center of cities to the airport, but this will only make the airports more easily accessible and the flights even better. So it's not a solution that will reduce the emissions from air transport. Um, and you can go for, well, hydrogen is a big difficulty. You need to cool it to minus 253 degrees to make it liquid. Liquid, it takes four times the volume of kerosene. You cannot have it in your wings because then it would warm immediately. So to keep it cold, as cold as you can, you need to have something very close to a sphere. So it takes the middle of the plane. It takes a lot of volume. It's not great. And then to fill in the airplanes, you need to avoid having any living beings around, and you need to transform the airports in immense chemical plants.
Yeah.
That's not an easy task, and you need to replace all the fleet. Um, so that's not a very good way. So you have the sustainable aviation fuel. So now it's more biofuels. Tomorrow it could be hydrogen enhanced biofuels. You need to have the carbon from biogenic origin, because if you just recycle carbon from fossil fuels, you cannot go to net zero emissions. Um, and indeed, hydrogen can help from a given amount of biomass, can help make more fuels at a huge cost. So all this is difficult. Will probably we can turn most of the current biofuel from land transportation, where it's not useful anymore, to aeroplanes. We don't need it anymore. We can electrify all the territorial transports, whatever they are, all of them. This is no big deal. So we can have, without expanding more the biofuels, because we have issues with biodiversity and issues with food. But if we just stick to what we have, we can possibly have a third of the current needs of aviation fulfilled, and maybe green hydrogen could help expand it. Big task. At least it goes in current planes. We don't need to change all planes to do that, but it will be long, it will be costly. The cost to me is not an issue for itself, because I think flying is way too cheap, and we need to slow down the growth rate of flying, because we're not going to succeed in our task. I don't know we can go to net zero with the flights. Probably we'll have to. It will be quite difficult. We need to compensate some of these CO2 emissions from flying. So that's really a big challenge for electrification. But of course, if we have hydrogen, it will come most likely from electrolysis. So electrification will be part of the solution for flying, a very indirect part.
So,
The other thing, yeah, sorry,
as you mentioned the hydrogen, let's talk about the hydrogen bubble a little bit. Is hydrogen
yeah.
the savior of heavy industry, or just a way for gas companies to keep their pipes relevant?
Well, it's not the savior of the industry, that's for sure. Uh, the industry already uses hydrogen, right?
Yeah.
It uses hydrogen to refine the fuels, to produce ammonia and methanol, and a few other smaller tasks. Um, we first need to green that hydrogen, and this could be done two ways: with lots of electricity, green electricity, and electrolysis of water. We could also think of electrification of the steam methane reformers, use some fossil gas only as a feedstock,
Mhm.
not as an energy source. If you do that, you cut one third of the emissions upstream and downstream. You cut one third of the gas demand, and you get a very concentrated flux of processed CO2. And this processed CO2 you can capture because it's very concentrated at almost no cost. So I would not eliminate the possibility of making some blue hydrogen as well as green hydrogen, where you need much less, a fourth or fifth of the electricity you need for electrolysis of water. but of course, then you have some gas. Um, and you can have, in both cases, you can have very little CO2 emissions. So we need, first of all, to green that hydrogen. Then we can use that hydrogen to make a few additional tasks, um, but not all are energy tasks. We can use it to as a process agent in steel making. We need to reduce the iron ores, which are oxidized in nature. It needs to be reduced as iron metal before it can be turned into steel. And this we can do with hydrogen. This has already been done for other reasons than climate in a plant in the 90s, I think. Um, and now you have a big plant that is almost finished in Sweden that will do this on an industrial scale, green steel with hydrogen to directly reduce iron, and then it goes into electric arc furnaces. So you have very little CO2 emissions linked to that. It's important because it's steel making is about 7% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and here hydrogen may have a role. However, there are also electric technology that would do it directly,
Yeah.
and there are 3 or 4 of them, and now they are still at pilot scale.
Mm.
The technology readiness level is lower than that for hydrogen, but it's more promising because it will be flexible, it will use less electricity, and it can use a much larger variety of qualities of iron ores. While with hydrogen, you need to have a very good quality of iron ores, which means if you start with a low quality iron ores, you need to improve it before, etc., etc. So this can be electrified at the end of the day, probably, but still, today you have a use of hydrogen for that. And then we might increase the production of ammonia to fuel our transoceanic ships with ammonia. That's a distinct possibility. It goes into the existing diesel engines with some modification.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's probably a workable solution, despite it entails some risks. It needs to be carefully done. But we can start seeing some ships being built for that. Another option is methanol, but methanol we have CO2 because we have carbon in methanol, so it's not that great. But with ammonia, you need to prevent to have nitrous oxides or nitrogen oxide. So it's not all solved and not all ready for now, but it's in progress. And finally, we can have hydrogen also as an ultimate form of storage in the electric grids. But of course, it's very inefficient because you go from electricity to hydrogen, okay, 70% efficiency, and then you store it, you compress it, you destore it, you transport it, so you reduce the efficiency to 50%, and then it goes into at best a gas turbines, and then you have an efficiency of 40% to 60% if it's CCGT, and so you end up with a 25% efficiency in total. So you do this when you cannot do otherwise.
Mm.
And of course, today with batteries, you can do all the daily variability. That's important. I know that's a question you have in mind also about the variability of solar energy.
Yeah.
The first answer, the first answer is to combine wind and solar.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important because except in the very sunny countries, you have it's obvious in Europe, you have a big difference in the solar production in summer and in winter. And in winter, in temperate countries, you have more electricity demand than in summer. So the solar does not fit well. It fit well for the summer, but it doesn't fit well for the autumn and the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to have wind turbines because you cannot hope storing huge amounts of electricity from one season to another. This would be tremendously costly because a storage that is only used once a year takes 365 times more time for recovering the investment than a storage that is being used every day.
Mhm.
And batteries will be used every day or even twice a day to offset the peaks in the morning and the evening peaks in the consumption. And so this is the role of batteries. But you may want to have some hydrogen to go from every season to some particular periods in winter, which are the Dunkelflaute.
Yeah.
Dunkelflaute are the week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, not consecutive, but 3 weeks during the winter sometimes, where you have too little wind and too little solar over relatively large areas.
Mhm.
So you need some support from something to burn. In the next 15 years, you can burn fossil gas. It's no big deal because it's still compatible with the pathways of reducing fossil gas considerably. But at the end of the day, you replace maybe this fossil gas with hydrogen,
Yeah.
and you have periods where you have too much renewable, too much solar or too much wind, so you can work your electrolyzers at those times. In fact, they can work all the time except during the Dunkelflaute, so their economy is not too bad.
So,
And during Dunkelflaute, you stop the electrolyzers and you start your um, thermal turbines to shoulder solar and wind that are at those times are too little.
so as you're answering the question, I'm thinking about one thing. It is so
Yes.
hard to get the grips of, understanding where are we right now in terms of energy transition. I know we are very far from where we want to be, but
Yes.
there if there's any organization in this world that has, let's say, accurate data, but not all of it, it's International Energy Agency. So basically, should they know the path based on that data, and do they give their opinion or directions to countries, and how these countries are responding to that, if they do?
Um, yeah, but as you know, the IEA gathers a number of OECD countries. Most OECD countries are
Mhm.
part of the IEA. Plus, they have a number of partner countries. They have constituted a grid of partner countries with China, Morocco, Kenya,
Yeah.
South Africa, whichever, which is that's great. But of course, they still have to respond to a wide diversity of views, and especially since Trump returned to the White House. So they're doing their best to express what they see, but they have to fight.
Mhm.
And I must say, I do not envy them in their current position.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult. I know that the US was willing to have the net zero disappear from the World Energy Outlook, and that all other countries protested and said, no, we need it because that's what we are trying to follow. And it's still here. But the US were successful in asking the IEA to, and in some way it was inevitable to recreate the current policy scenario, which in a way fits with what the US is doing in its own country. Well, to some extent, because things are going on also on their own economic merits in Texas, in California, and not only in democratic states. Huh?
Yeah.
Like Texas is the state that had the more solar installed last year, and it's a state that has by far the most cumulative wind power in the US. And it's not really a progressive state on many other counts. So things will also continue to progress thanks to their own merits. But of course, it's been a stop on a number of things until some adult in the room realizes that this brings the US back and hold the US back in the global economy, on all counts, and it's a dead end.
So you argue that the energy transition actually reduces total mining. That feels
Yes.
counterintuitive. How does digging for lithium involves less earth moving than digging for coal?
Well, digging for coal. Well, if you look closely, the question should not be about lithium, because lithium is so small. The question should rather be about copper, because copper is big.
Hmm?
Um, 80, more than 80% of the earth moving work is done for three metals. Um, that's gold, iron, and copper. So copper is the one at stake in the energy transition. Lithium is so small,
Yeah.
it does not matter. Coal is 8 billion tons consumption, but for which you need to move 40 billion tons. And when you look at the global number, you look at the UNEP report on the extraction. We extract in total 100 billion tons of material each year. Half of it is non-metallic minerals. That's phosphorus, stone, sand, gravel, all that kind of stuff. Half of it. Then you have a quarter that's biomass,
Hmm.
trees, harvest, fishing, etc. That's 25%. Then you have fossil fuels. That's 15%, um, and that's mostly coal. And then you have 10% at the extraction work for the metals, all metals, and of which 80, more than 80% is for gold, iron, and copper. So this gives you a perspective on what really matters and what does not.
So, what is the biggest technical lie currently being told about electric vehicles that drives you crazy? You just mentioned before the marketing, that negative marketing about renewables. I think this goes hand in hand with the marketing about the electric vehicles, and we both know that.
That's right. The polls suggest that out of two French people, one believes that electric vehicles are worse for the environment than thermal cars, because you have plenty of information about the mines, the problems with mines, which exist, of course, and not all mines are making good work. It's very different. In fact, the big international companies are making the better job. The national companies are making a not so good job, and the artisanal mines are often the worst, because they don't have the means to doing a good job. But um, so we're inundated with information about the mines, which is wrong, or ex- excessive, or I mean, even nickel in Indonesia, it's not. You have pictures that are terrible, but it's 1% of the territory. You have a number of things. Of course, you have the war in Democratic Republic of Congo, that is terrible, and that is fueled by the willingness to get to the mine, etc. Uh, but if you look at the things, electric thermal vehicles and transportation is a big chunk of the emissions globally.
Yeah.
The world is just next to industry, and that's basically private cars and second trucks. And together they account for, I don't know, 25% of the total emissions. So
Mhm.
we cannot go too close to our goals if we don't change that deeply, and we can't change that deeply. So indeed, the other lie is to say it's very bad because the electricity is still made with coal, etc. Of course, it has a part of truth. In Germany, in Poland, in China, there is big chunk of coal still, but it's reducing at an amazing speed. China, it was 70% of electricity. Now it's 53 last year. It was 58 the year before.
Hmm.
The progress in green electricity is amazing. Last year, you had 10,000 terawatt hour in China, of which 4,000 terawatt hour came from renewables. It's deploying at an amazing speed. And if you buy an electric car for next, I don't know, 15 or 19, I think 19 years is the average lifetime of a car, it will get very, very decarbonized at the end. So even if you look at the number from today in Europe, an electric cars emit a third of the CO2 emissions of a thermal car. But that's based on what it can do today.
Yeah.
And that's based on the average carbon content of the kilowatt hour. What we're going to have tomorrow is less because we are decarbonizing the grids, plus we have batteries. And we are going to use our batteries more and more to get cheap electricity, which is electricity when there is a lot, which means when solar and wind produce a lot. So we learned we need to have the correct economics price signals in the right time. But we learn to use more and more our batteries of electric vehicles to get more and more renewables. And so this will help increase the share of renewables in the grid. And at the same time, it will greatly improve the environmental balance of electric cars. Because if you have an electric car that is almost only driven by green electricity, then it's like you have today in France or in Sweden. It's 5 times less CO2 over the lifetime of the car than a thermal car. The difference comes from the battery, the production of the battery. That matters indeed. And here too, we're going to make progress. We're going to improve the density. We're going to use the metals better, and we're going to make progress there. So yeah, that's a lie that well, the worst form of the lie is people who say, I will keep my old car for 5 more years. It's already 15 years old, and I want to keep it. That's a green choice. No, it's not, because not only for the CO2, but for the particulate matter, for the nitrous oxide, it's 20 times more than the thermal car of today. And of course, an electric car of today. It's a disaster in the
But
cities, and that's thousands of premature deaths due to air pollution. That's the worst,
I
the
agree
worst
with
lie
that.
ever.
I would agree with that. But there is a fact that almost anyone can buy electric car in China. It's so cheap and available, affordable. And in Europe, it's like only, the higher class can drive electric car. Why is that?
Well, it's not entirely true. There are some models that are more affordable. And if you look at the price, people often have in
But
mind the price
here's an
because
example.
they both,
If
yeah,
if if
yeah,
you were driving, say, a Honda CRV, and that's like pretty much normal family car, and you want to buy electric car, but at that price, of that used car, you could get, I don't know, something as electric Zoe. It you know it's just it's getting from one standard to another. We're trying to get this match of the car you need, and it being electric.
yeah, I agree. And this proves, I would say, that some of the NGO that say we need only small electric cars, they're making a wrong claim.
Yeah.
People need the car they need.
Yeah.
Dot. It's for them to choose. Dot. If they are, it's a rich family that needs little cars because they have a, um, a secondary house and they can afford to take the fast train to get there and then the taxi. They or rent a car. They don't need a big car. The poor families, they have to go on vacation in a camping, so they need to put in the car the whole family, the dog,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, true.
the, the, the board, and the camps and the tents and the camping material. They need a big car. They don't necessarily need a luxurious SUV, but they need a car with some volume, right? So we need to produce the car people need and to make them electric and to make them affordable. I think we're making progress, but indeed the policy of the big companies was to start with luxurious cars where they have good margins, and they say that's how we finance the research, etc., etc. I'm still puzzled by the fact that both Renault and Peugeot were in advance 30 years ago on electric cars. I drove one when I was at ADEM, long before I was to the IA. I drove an electric car. That was before the lithium ion revolution. They already were there. And what have they done during these 30 years? I just don't know. I don't understand. But you had Zoe. Zoe is a good small car, but small, but good. And you had Tesla, and both cars were very different, but they both helped popularize the electric vehicles.
True.
But Tesla was in 2012, and since then they have slept away. They have done some good cars, but yes, they are too expensive. But be careful. People tend to compare with the price they bought their car 15 years ago. And
Yeah.
if they go to the shop and look at the price of a thermal car doing the same, they may get disappointed and see it's not that big difference with the electric cars because cars have been taken weight for good and bad reasons. Some of the good reasons are safety. We have we went from 13,000 deaths per year in France to 3,000,
Mhm.
and it's partly had cost in weight of the cars. So you cannot just criticize the cost, the weight increases of the cars. Cannot be so blunt. And so there are plenty of reasons for price increases. But yes, it should work, and the government should keep on helping families to get to the first cars that are available. Yes, at a discount. We had the social leasing. That was a great invention, but it was immediately taken off.
Yeah.
So there is people that, all these people that travel 100 kilometers per day for their work because they are helping the others to the elderly. They move from one house to another all day round, right? They are paid for their 4 hour works and they are not paid for their 4 hour driving. But that's another thing. Uh, they need to pay the fuel, so they know the difference.
Yeah.
And if they can, if they have the chance, if they are available to recharge their cars at home during the night, they save a lot with an electric car. They save a lot. So it's worse for them, and they understand that when they are being offered a leasing that makes the upfront cost not too high, they jump on it. So governments need to provide them with that, and then we can see the electric cars develop really really fast.
So you're French, and the France has about 85% electricity production from nuclear. So my next question is the nuclear. Is nuclear power a necessary partner to renewables, or is it just an expensive niche that's slowing down the faster, cheaper solar revolution?
Well, neither one nor the other. It depends which nuclear. The existing one is amortized, so it's an opportunity. It's decarbonize electricity at an affordable price for France, which has a much lower spot price than its neighbors. Uh, so far, so good. So the existing one is fine. Now, the new ones. The new ones, it's full of questions. Is it necessary? I'm not sure. I understand that for some, I understand that for some people, they would be happy to have it as a backup, or rather as a, because it's not a backup. A backup comes only when you're short in solar and wind. So that doesn't go with the economy of nuclear, right? You cannot build nuclear plants for 500 hours a year. So it's not a backup. It's a base.
Yeah,
It's a
it's a
base,
base load.
and as a base, it's it can be seen by many as an insurance that you will always have this base. You will have this base that will make the green lights in the streets, the hospitals still work, whatever it happens. I understand that. People are not easily convinced that you can do the same level of safety with solar, wind, hydro, batteries, and a few thermal plants that work only a few hundred hours a year. But that's possible, and many countries will have no nuclear, and they will still succeed in having 100% decarbonized electricity, I think. So it's not necessary. But I understand that for the country that have it, first it's a big industry with lots of people, lots of political weight, and it's it makes lots of people being more comfortable on the uninterruptibility of the power. So I understand that,
Yeah.
and I will not fight against that. But if it takes too much resources, or if it's being used as a reasons to fight against renewables, then it could become a big impediment.
Hmm.
That's what we're seeing nowadays in France, where there is a big campaign to say, okay, we have too much electricity, which is true since the 2019, the consumption has not increased. We had the crisis in 2022, a double crisis for us because we had gas, of course, like all European countries, at a huge price because of the Russian aggression. And then we had the problem with the 20 nuclear reactors being stopped for repairs because of the discovery of what's the name? Corrosion.
Hmm.
So we had to stop them before repairing them. Since now it's done, so it has been restored, and we have continued building solar and wind. So we have too much. We export, which is good because we get some money from it. We help the others. We help the other decarbonate. It replaces gas or coal electricity in Germany, in Poland, by our neighbors. So it's all good. Uh, but at some points, it gives us negative prices.
Yeah.
And this is an embarrassment for EDF, who would like to have enough money to finance its next nuclear power plants. Okay. Um, we know that the electricity from these nuclear power plants will be twice as high or three times as high as the electricity we could get from renewables, especially if we modified a little bit our procedures in France, because we have the most expensive renewables in Europe, because too many bureaucracy, too much bureaucracy, too many laws, challenges, too long periods before getting authorized, etc. So we have a lot of issues. Too small wind turbines being authorized, Too small solar farms being authorized, etc. So we're increasing the cost of renewables stupidly. But we know that the new nuclear will be more expensive. Okay, let's have some of it, but we should not stop deploying renewables for that, because we have in the short term we have a little too much electricity, and that's going to be discussed tomorrow by the Prime Minister and the renewable energy industry. So we'll see how it comes out.
Interesting. How do we handle the variability of wind and sun without the grid collapsing? Is the flexibility you write about actually ready for prime time?
Well, you have two distinct problems that people often confuse. You have a problem that is called the adequacy. It means, do we have enough production for the given demand?
Mhm.
And this we can, first of all, we should have the right mix of solar and wind. That's the very first thing. And then we should have the right choices in solar and wind. That is, for example, more and more we go to turbines. We should go to turbines with large rotors, uh, which means for the same electric power, higher capacity factors, extending hours beyond the periods of very good winds.
Mhm.
We should go to periods where the wind is not as good, but still with big rotors we can get electricity. So we have a more even production. That's very important. Same with solar. We should move from having everything facing the equator, south, for west
Mhm.
orientation, westward orientation, so we can get more into the evening peak. So that's the first thing. Then we should have, of course, batteries, and as much as we can, uh, pumped hydropower. And it's not easy to deploy new pumped hydropower, but we do have a number of dams that could be equipped with and turned into pumped hydropower. So we should consider that very seriously, because contrary to battery, it can extend to the week. So it's really helpful to have both sorts of storage. Um, so that's one problem, adequacy, and of course we should give people, consumers, the right signals in due time, so that they can activate all the flexibility means they have or they could require. So I gave you the example of the battery of electric cars. Of course, the battery should not be refilled at times of peak hours. It should be done in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, when you have solar, in the middle of the night, when you have wind and very little consumption. That's the right times to refill your battery. You have some electricity providers that already manage that for you. You can pass a contract, and you each day you say, okay, tomorrow I need to go there and there, so I need 80 kilometers or 150 kilometers in my car, and then the software manages to get it for you at the cheapest price,
Mhm.
and the cheapest price, uh, avoiding the hours where you have a lot of consumption and too little production, the peak hours. You have similar flexibilities in the industry, sometimes that are not being used. People just are not aware. Uh, Even in the aluminum industry, which is very um, eager to have very even electricity provision all the time, you can manage the heat, and make the system much more flexible. That's like building an enormous battery at a relatively cheap cost. Um, you have flexibility in many other cases in houses, in transports, and in industries. And all this is exactly as important as storage. So this is a problem of adequacy. Have enough production for the demand. You move the production or you move the demand. You have another problem, which is stability, which is a problem they had in the Iberian Peninsula, which is it's the opposite problem in a sense, because it appears when you have way huge amounts of renewables in the system,
Mhm.
and then you have a system with too little inertia to help keep the frequency and the voltage constant. And because of that, you risk having some devices that protect themselves in disconnecting from the grid, and then and then you fall back into the adequacy problem.
Yeah.
So we need to find to deploy, because we know how to do that. We need to deploy the means to regulate voltage, reactive power, frequency more. Not only today, it's traditionally it was solved by the rotating inertia of the thermal plants. They have a big generator that even if it it provides a lot of inertia. We need to modify this. We need to have batteries with grid forming um, ondular. What you have with solar plants, you have
As a storage.
no. You need to add associate batteries with the the device that transform the DC
Yeah,
of
transformers.
solar transformers. What's transformers? The
Yeah.
inverters. Sorry, inverters. We need to have grid forming inverters associated with batteries, so we can deliver. We have other sources of inertia, and we can maintain. That's probably the mistake that was done in Spain, not to deploy enough of these devices while deploying renewables. We had also a similar story in Southern Australia years ago,
Mhm.
and because of this frequency issues, you had a lot of wind turbines that get isolated from the grid, and then the grid crashed. They changed the grid codes, and this did not happen again.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
that sometimes it's quite easy solutions.
if we transition to 100% renewables, who are the new OPEC nations? Are we just trading the dependency for another with China and minerals?
Yeah, it's a real problem, but we have to get understanding that the dependency is not of the same quality. If you if China were to stop exporting its um,
Minerals.
PV
Yeah.
modules, PV modules, minerals is a different thing. PV modules, all the PV that has been installed so far will continue to deliver electricity. While when the OPEC stopped sending us oil in 74
Mhm.
or in 79, or if we had a big dispute with Russia, as in 2022, and we still have, we are immediately
Yeah.
we have immediately a lot of issues, because we need that oil at the time for everything: heating, transport, industry, etc. And the difficulties are immediate. That's why the IA was created at first, to ensure that all consuming countries get 3 months of petroleum products at hand to face any shortage. So the shortage has more immediate implication than a shortage in PV module,
Hmm.
at least for us. For China, it has similar implications than an embargo on oil for oil exporting countries.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, I'm not sure they would find that it's of their best interest to doing that. Mineral is more critical, I would say, because they could they have put a grip on mining companies a bit throughout the world. In fact, they're dominant with their own reserves only in rare earths. On the other, they are not the dominant producers, but they are often the dominant refiner.
Hmm.
And as dominant refiners, indeed, they could prefer to sell us electric cars rather than the minerals that we need to make our own batteries,
Yeah.
right? They of course, and so that's a serious risk, and all the managers I know from battery plants being started in France, they are looking for lots of alternative producers and alternative chains for getting the materials they need. But yes, that's where the real problem is in my way, in my sense, more than uh, and yes, we need to move away from this big dependencies. That's for sure. Even if it's not the same dependencies that we had with oil.
What's the biggest market opportunity in the next decade that everyone is currently ignoring because of AI?
No, I don't know. I don't know. I think there is a lot to do with thermal storage as a way to move from electricity to heat, but uh, with high temperature heat for industrial processes, and with collecting electricity during half the time,
Hmm.
6 to 12 hours a day, and delivering high temperature heat around the clock. And this you can do with devices such as um, bricks,
Hmm.
uh, refractory bricks. And this is a big thing, I believe. But you also have batteries. I mean, the batteries, maybe the future for stationary batteries is with sodium ion batteries. Now we have a majority of, for the lithium battery, we have a majority of lithium um, phosphate iron
Hmm.
LFP batteries instead of nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. So this is changing all the time. We need to continue to explore that. Uh, I don't know what the big. If I knew, I would be rich, and I'm not. So
Good
no,
one.
I don't know.
Good one. So, you titled your book The Energies of Hope after 40 years
Yes,
of data. Is hope
yes,
a choice you make, or is it a conclusion the data force you to reach?
a bit of both, to be frank. A bit of both because first uh, we need to see also the bright face of the things. Um, Otherwise, we go on pathways that do not work, trying to convince everyone to be very virtuous. I mean, if you look at what of course, I'm for self-sufficiency as much as we can, but it's not going to work as a kind of general thing for the whole world, where you still have 2 billion people that cannot feed their needs. Um, at least we need to get rid of hyper consumerism, etc. There are places where we really need to make efforts of self-sufficiency, but that cannot be the thing that changes everything. Um, so some people tend to go to despair because they believe that everything we attempt to make things better make in fact things worse. mining, electric cars, everything is worse than what we had before. No, no, that's not the case. And then the data, they show that solar after wind develops at the highest ever speed for a new energy technology. Um, during decades we were below 20% of the global electricity with renewables, and that was mostly hydropower.
Mhm.
In 2012, we crushed this 20% bar. In 10 years later, we're above 30%. In 3 years from now, we'll be at 40%. By 2032, we'll likely be at 50%, etc. And at the same time, we have started decarbonize by electrification, transport. In China, in the last months, last year, we had one new truck out of two being electric.
Mhm.
That was one out of five at the beginning of the year. It's one out of three on average over the year. It was one out of two at the end of the year. So we'll see how it goes, but it's coming, and we now have the tools to do a lot of things. In truth, I think the Paris Accord would not have been possible without the big improvements we already had in renewables
Yeah.
before, and that have continued since then. A number of developing countries that were very reluctant in the 90s to engage in everything,
Mhm.
they accepted to engage in something because they knew they could do part of the path with renewables,
Yeah.
with a number of other benefits, better sovereignty, better air quality, etc., etc. So, um, and this is going on. This is going on. So careful countries like China, they don't take very ambitious targets
Mhm.
because they prefer to be 5 years in advance than 5 years late. But they are 5 years in advance on most of them, um, and things are going up at light speed now.
Yeah.
So yeah, um, there will be difficulties. There will be lasting difficulties. Uh, I mentioned aviation. I could have mentioned red meat,
Yeah.
which is difficult to electrify, if I may say, which is where it's difficult to reduce the methane emissions a lot, and so we need to have some move away from that. We're not maybe not going to solve everything. We'll need to have some. By the way, we need to go to net zero emission, not um, gross zero emissions, because of aviation, because of red meat, etc. We possibly will compensate much of it with reforestation, etc.
Yeah.
Maybe we're not going to exactly net zero, but if we are close to that, we slow dramatically the rate pace of change, and we have give us our societies much better chances to adapt smoothly.
And the last question for today. If your grandchildren look back at this moment in 2050, what is the one thing you want them to know about why we either succeeded or failed?
Ah, maybe a very selfish response. I dedicated my last book to my first grandchild, and I wish she knows that we did our best.
Yeah.
Whatever it happens, we did our best every day.
Cedric, thank you so much for being my guest today. It was an honor.
It was my pleasure.